The year is 2018. The air in the office is clean. Too clean. It smells like toner and weak coffee. This is the Snake River Grain Cooperative, Pocatello, Idaho. A young man named Peterson sits behind a big desk. He is the manager now. He took over from Frank Miller a few years back. Across from him sit three men in dark suits. They do not look like they belong here. Their posture is perfect. Their faces are unreadable. They are from the Asahi Shuzo Brewery, not the one you know. A smaller, more prestigious craft division in Yamaguchi, Japan. Between them on the desk is a single sheet of paper, a lab analysis. One of the Japanese men, Mr. Sato, pushes it forward. He speaks through an interpreter. The malt profile is extraordinary. Notes of toasted almond, honey, a hint of spice. We have never seen a barley with this character. Peterson glances at the paper. He corrects them gently. It says here it's wheat, sir, not barley. Mr. Sato nods. Even better. More difficult. We want to buy the entire harvest. Peterson looks at the name at the top of the report. Tanaka Red. He has never heard of it. He runs the co-op. He knows every variety grown in this valley. Golden 86, Westbred, UI Stone. Not this. He shakes his head. I'm sorry, we don't carry a Tanaka Red. It's not a registered variety here. The interpreter confers with Mr. Sato. Mr. Sato speaks again. We understand you do not carry it. We are prepared to offer 10 times the market price per bushel. Peterson's eyes widen. 10 times? For wheat? That was not a price. That was a ransom. He looks again at the paper, at the name, Tanaka. He knows a Tanaka, an old farmer out on the flats, a quiet man, keeps to himself, never joins the co-op, drives an old truck. Peterson feels a knot in his stomach. He looks at the men from Japan. He tells them again, we don't buy that man's wheat. The room goes silent. The air conditioning hums. Mr. Sato looks at Peterson, not with anger, not with pity, with a kind of quiet finality. The interpreter leans forward. He delivers the final line. We know. We flew 6,000 miles to find the man you won't buy from. This is the kind of story we tell. The stories of people who were counted out, written off, told they were worthless, only to build something so valuable the world had to come find them. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel. Because the history books forget people like this. We don't. To understand how a man's wheat could be worthless in Idaho and priceless in Tokyo, you have to go back. Way back. Back to a different man, a different desk. Back to 1975. The man's name was Kenji Tanaka. He was 24 years old. He stood in the yard of his family's small farm. It wasn't the original farm. That had been lost, taken, in 1942, when his grandfather, his grandmother, and his father were sent to Minidoka, an internment camp just 100 miles from their own land. When they got out, the land was gone, sold for pennies on the dollar. They started over, on a smaller patch of ground, harder soil, less water. Kenji grew up in the shadow of that loss. He learned the contours of every acre. He learned the smell of rain on dry dirt. He learned the language of the machines. Then, in the summer of 1974, he learned about pain. A post-hole auger, a moment of distraction, a snagged piece of canvas jacket. It took his left arm, just below the elbow. The doctors said he was lucky. He would never farm again, they said. You need 2 good hands for this work. Kenji spent a year learning to be a stranger in his own body, learning to tie his boots one-handed, learning to write with his other hand, learning to ignore the stares in town. But he did not learn to stop being a farmer, because that was not a job. It was his name. In the spring of 1975, he did something his father thought was foolish. He planted 5 acres of his grandfather's wheat, a strange, red-hued variety nobody grew anymore. The seeds had been saved in a tin box for 30 years. His grandfather called it akamugi, red wheat. It grew poorly. The yield was half of what his neighbors got. But Kenji harvested it. He did it himself, driving a combine he couldn't quite handle. His left sleeve was pinned at the elbow. He filled the bed of his old Ford pickup with the grain, just 1 truckload, and he drove it to the Snake River Grain Cooperative. He drove it to a man named Frank Miller. Frank Miller was a good man. Everyone in the valley said so. He served on the church board, coached Little League for 20 years. He ran the co-op with a steady hand. He was fair. He was honest. He was certain about how the world worked. He saw Kenji's truck pull up, saw the boy get out. 1 arm. He felt a pang of sympathy. Kenji walked into the office, the same office Peterson would sit in 40 years later. He said, "Frank, I've got some wheat for you." Frank nodded. "Let's have a look." He walked out to the truck. He let the grain run through his fingers. The kernels were smaller than usual, darker, almost red. He'd never seen anything like it. "What variety is this, son?" Kenji hesitated. "It's just an old family one." Frank scooped a sample, took it inside to the lab. He ran the tests. Protein, moisture, test weight. The numbers that decide a farmer's fate. He came back out 10 minutes later. His face was serious, concerned. He leaned against the truck. "Kenji, where did you get this?" "It was my grandfather's." Frank sighed, a long, slow breath. "Son, I can't buy this." Kenji's heart sank. "Why not?" Frank spoke gently, like a doctor delivering bad news. "The protein is too low, 11%. The market wants 14 for bread flour. The test weight is 54 pounds per bushel. The standard is 60. It's a non-standard variety. There's no category for it. There's no market for it. To the co-op, this grain is worthless." Worthless. The word hung in the air. Kenji looked at the truck bed. A year of his life, his one-armed life. Worthless. Frank put a hand on his shoulder, a kind gesture, a fatherly gesture. "I'm telling you this for your own good. I'm trying to protect you. Go home. Plow under whatever you have left. Next year, you plant a modern wheat, a high-yield wheat. I'll even extend you the credit for the seed myself. I'm not going to be the man who lets a good young farmer like you go broke chasing a ghost." Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who genuinely believed they were helping you. Someone who used the language of protection to build you a cage. That certainty, that kind, compassionate, absolute certainty about your limits. It is a quiet poison. It is harder to fight than hate, because you cannot fight it with anger. You can only fight it with decades of your life. Kenji looked at Frank Miller. He saw the kindness in the man's eyes, the genuine concern. And that was the worst part. Frank wasn't being cruel, he was being practical. He was being sensible. He was being right, according to the world he knew. Kenji didn't say anything. He just nodded. He got back in his truck. He drove home with his worthless wheat, the dust rising behind him like a funeral shroud. He pulled into the farmyard. His father, Haruo, was waiting on the porch. Haruo had seen the full truck leave. He saw the full truck return. He didn't need to ask what happened. Kenji got out. He walked past his father, went into the house, sat at the kitchen table. He stared at his one good hand. Maybe they were all right. The doctors, the neighbors, Frank Miller. Maybe he couldn't do this. His father came in. He sat down across from him. The silence in that kitchen was heavy, full of things that couldn't be said, full of history. Finally, Haruo spoke. His voice was quiet. "He told you it was no good." Kenji nodded. He said it was worthless. Haruo looked out the window, towards the 5 acres of red wheat still standing. He was silent for a long time. Then he stood up. He went to an old wooden chest in the corner, a chest that had made the trip to Minidoka and back. He opened it. The smell of cedar and mothballs filled the room. He took out a book, a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth. He placed it on the table in front of Kenji. Kenji opened it. The pages were filled with his grandfather's handwriting, a mix of Japanese characters and English words. There were drawings of root systems, charts of rainfall, notes on the sun and the soil. It was a record of a life's work, a life spent understanding one particular plant. On the first page, his grandfather had written a dedication. "For my son, so he will not forget." Haruo put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Your grandfather." He listened to the ground, not to the market. When they took this farm, they took the land. They took the buildings, the machines. But they couldn't take the knowledge. He pointed to the book. "That is the real farm, Kenji. It's all in there. Frank Miller knows the price of wheat. He does not know its worth." He looked his son in the eye. "The soil remembers, Kenji. The soil remembers." That phrase, "the soil remembers," it became Kenji's anchor, his mantra, his compass. He didn't plow the field under. He spent that winter reading the journal. He didn't just read the words. He learned to see the world through his grandfather's eyes. His grandfather believed the red wheat was special, not because of its yield, but because of its struggle. He wrote that the best flavor didn't come from easy living. It didn't come from perfect irrigation and tons of fertilizer. It came from stress, dry farming, making the plant work for its life, forcing the roots to go deep, deep into the earth, searching for water. That struggle, he wrote, is what creates the character, the complex proteins, the nutty, rich flavor. The market wanted a fat, lazy wheat. His grandfather had cultivated an athlete. Kenji realized Frank Miller was right, and Frank Miller was wrong. The wheat was worthless as a commodity. It could not be sold by the ton. It had to be sold by the story. So he changed his plan. He wasn't going to sell grain to the co-op. He was going to sell flour to people. He found an old stone mill for sale, a small one. He paid for it with the last of his savings, cash. He spent weeks modifying it, changing the belts, adjusting the gears, so he could operate it safely with one hand. He did the same with his tractor and his small combine. He went to a local mechanic, an old man named Gus. Gus looked at the problem. He looked at Kenji's arm. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a solution. "We can weld a steering knob here. Run a secondary hydraulic lever here. You'll have to use your feet more, but it can be done." They spent a month in Gus's workshop, cutting steel, welding brackets, rerouting hoses. When they were finished, Kenji had a tractor he could control. Gus wouldn't take any money. He just clapped Kenji on the shoulder. "Your granddad, he was a good man. He helped my father save his crop during the Depression. He was 10 years ahead of everyone. And they called him crazy too. Don't you listen to them." That spring, Kenji didn't go to the co-op for seed. He used the seeds he had saved. He planted 10 acres. He farmed it using his grandfather's methods. No-till, long before it was a buzzword. Cover crops in the winter, minimal water. His neighbors watched him. They shook their heads. Look at Tanaka's folly. He's farming dust. That wheat is thin as a rail. He'll be broke by Christmas. Frank Miller would drive by on his way to town. He'd see the sparse, reddish fields. He'd feel that same pang of pity. Poor kid, too stubborn for his own good. He was trying to protect him. He was certain he was right. Have you ever had to believe in something so hard that the doubt of others felt like noise? Have you ever been called a fool for following a path only you could see? Let me know in the comments, because for Kenji Tanaka, the world's doubt was a sharpening stone. It made his resolve harder, clearer. He harvested that fall. The yield was still low, but he didn't care. He wasn't selling yield, he was selling flavor. He milled the wheat himself. The stone mill ground it slowly, coolly, preserving the oils. The aroma that filled the barn was incredible, nutty, sweet, alive. He put the flour in simple brown paper bags. He stamped them with a logo he designed himself, a single stalk of red wheat. Tanaka Farms. He loaded the bags into his pickup and drove to the farmer's market in Boise. He set up a small table. Most people walked right by. They wanted cheap, all-purpose white flour. His was expensive. It was brownish red. Then, a woman stopped. She was a baker. She picked up a bag. She opened it and smelled the flour. Her eyes went wide. She bought 5 pounds. The next week, she came back. She bought 50 pounds. She told him, "I don't know what you're doing, but this flour, it has a soul. It makes my bread taste like bread again." That was the beginning. What happened next was not a miracle. It was just work. Decades of quiet, relentless work. Let me tell you about the next 40 years. This is where the story gets bigger than one man, bigger than one farm. 1980. Kenji is farming 15 acres. He sells 2,000 pounds of flour, mostly at farmers markets. He buys a slightly better bagging machine, cash. 1985. He is farming 30 acres. A small article appears in a local food magazine. A chef in Sun Valley starts using his flour, exclusively. He says it's his secret ingredient. Kenji buys a used delivery van, cash. 1990. He is farming 80 acres. 40 of those acres are part of his grandfather's original homestead. He bought them back from the son of the man who bought it in the 40s. The son was happy to sell. The soil was poor, he said. Kenji just smiled. He paid in cash. Frank Miller is still at the co-op. He hears the whispers about the crazy one-armed farmer getting premium prices. He dismisses it. A niche market, a fad. It won't last. He is certain. 1995. Kenji is farming 200 acres. He's bought back another piece of the old farm, cash. Artisan bakeries from Portland and Seattle are calling him. They want to be on his client list. There is a waiting list. He never borrows a dime. The soil remembers. He puts the profits back into the land, restoring the soil his grandfather wrote about. 2000. He is farming 400 acres. He has bought back almost all of the original Tanaka homestead, cash. He is no longer just selling flour. He is selling whole grains to small breweries. Craft brewers who are discovering that different wheat varieties create different flavor profiles in their beer. His red wheat, they say, is magical. 2005. A food writer from the New York Times flies to Idaho. She writes a story. The ghost wheat of Idaho and the farmer who listens to the soil. The story goes viral. The phone does not stop ringing. Kenji builds a new milling facility. He hires 5 employees. He pays them well. He buys the equipment with cash. 2010. He is farming over 800 acres. He is debt-free, completely self-sufficient. He turns down offers from national distributors. He keeps it small. He keeps it quality. He doesn't need to be the biggest. He needs to be the best. He is 60 years old now. His hair is gray. The lines on his face are deep. He still drives the same old Ford pickup. Frank Miller retired in 2008. He lives in a small house in town. Sometimes he sees the Tanaka Farm's delivery trucks. He sees the new silos out on the old Tanaka place. He feels something he can't quite name, a confusion, a sense that the rules he lived by might not have been the only rules. By 2018, Kenji Tanaka was not just a farmer, he was a legend. A quiet one, but a legend nonetheless. And that is when the men from Japan found him. They didn't find him through the co-op. They found him through a tiny craft brewery in Oregon, who got the grain from a baker in Seattle, who heard about it from a chef in Sun Valley, who bought it from a one-armed man at a farmer's market in Boise 40 years earlier. The world had finally caught up. It had flown 6,000 miles to knock on his door. The brewery deal was signed, a 10-year exclusive contract. The price was confidential. But it made Kenji Tanaka a wealthy man. The news spread through the valley, like a wildfire in a dry field. Frank Miller heard about it at the coffee shop. He sat in his usual booth. He listened to the other old farmers talking. Can you believe it? The Japanese. Paying a fortune for Tanaka's weed wheat. I heard they're building him new silos. Frank didn't say anything. He just paid for his coffee and left. He got in his old Chevy pickup. He didn't drive home. He drove west, out towards the flats, out towards the Tanaka farm. He hadn't been out that way in years. He saw it from a mile away. The fields. They were glowing. A deep, vibrant red under the afternoon sun. It wasn't the thin, pathetic crop he remembered. It was thick, healthy, beautiful. He saw the new silos, gleaming silver, with a simple logo painted on the side, the Asahi Shuzo crest. He pulled his truck over on the side of the road. He just stared for a long time. He saw Kenji standing by the edge of a field, older now, his hair white, his shoulders stooped just a little. But he stood there like he was a king, surveying his kingdom. Frank felt a pull he didn't understand. He put the truck in gear. He drove down the long dirt driveway. He hadn't been on this land in over 40 years. He parked his truck next to Kenji's old Ford. The two trucks, a silent story of two different lives. He got out. The dust felt different here. The air smelled different. Kenji turned. He saw Frank. He didn't look surprised. He just waited. Frank walked towards him. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't know what to say. He started with the only thing he could think of. I heard about the Japanese. Kenji nodded. They came. Frank looked at the fields. They're paying a lot. They are. Frank shook his head, a gesture of pure confusion. I don't understand it. I ran the tests myself all those years ago. It was worthless grain. There was no anger in his voice, just the profound bewilderment of a man whose compass had broken. Kenji was silent for a long moment. He looked not at Frank, but at the soil, the red dirt that had been his life's work. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, devastating in its simplicity. It was worthless to the co-op, Frank. It was worthless for a system that values weight over everything else, a system that wants every kernel to be the same. You told me what it was worth to you. You never asked what it was worth to me. Frank felt it then, the thing he couldn't name before. It was the chilling realization that his kindness had been a form of blindness. His protection had been a prison. His certainty had been a wall. He finally looked at Kenji, really looked at him. He saw the missing arm, but for the first time he didn't see a limitation. He saw a source of strength. "I was trying to help you, son." He said it softly. A plea, an explanation for a mistake too big to apologize for. Kenji met his gaze, and he gave him the only absolution he had. "I know. That's what made it so hard." The story doesn't end there, because a true legacy is not what you build for yourself, it's what you leave for others. The contract with the brewery was just the beginning. It was the validation, the proof, but it wasn't the purpose. In 2019, Kenji Tanaka used the money to create the Tanaka Heritage Grain Initiative, a foundation dedicated to helping other farmers. Farmers who wanted to grow things based on flavor, not just yield. He established a seed bank to preserve other worthless varieties of corn, wheat, and barley. He funded a scholarship at the University of Idaho for students of sustainable agriculture. He didn't want to create a monopoly, he wanted to start a movement. His daughter, Hana, came home. She had a degree in agronomy. She had a mind for science. But she had her great-grandfather's heart. She took over the day-to-day operations of the farm. She didn't discard the old ways. She blended them with the new. She used satellite imagery to monitor soil moisture. And she used her great-grandfather's journal to decide when not to water. She used genetic testing to select the best seeds. And she used her father's one-handed wisdom to understand the soul of the plant. She started a new co-op, a small one, the Kindred Grains Cooperative. It didn't compete with the big co-op. It operated on a different philosophy. It didn't ask for a test weight of 60. It asked for a story. It asked for a unique flavor. It paid for character, not just for weight. A handful of other local farmers joined. They started planting small plots of heritage grains. The co-op found markets for them, with bakers, chefs, and brewers who understood worth beyond the commodity price. The ripple effect had begun. One man's quiet refusal to be told his work was worthless was now changing the landscape of the entire valley. The soil was remembering, not just on the Tanaka farm, but everywhere. Today, if you go to that farm in Idaho, you will find Hana Tanaka. She might be in the fields or in the office, but often you will find her at the old kitchen table. The same table where her father sat after his defeat. The same table where her grandfather sat to write his notes. In front of her is the physical artifact of her family's story, the leather-bound journal. Its pages are thin as onion skin. The ink is faded. She runs her hand over a diagram of a root system her great-grandfather drew in 1938. Her fingers trace a line of his elegant, patient script, a mix of two languages, a bridge between two worlds. The camera closes in on a single line, written in English. A simple, profound truth that outlasted internment camps and lost land and the well-meaning certainty of good men. The soil remembers. Value is a story we tell ourselves, a number on a screen, a price per bushel. We are taught to believe in the market, in the system, in the men who run the tests and give us the numbers. But there are other kinds of value. The value of memory, the value of persistence, the value of heritage, the value of proving, not to them, but to yourself, that you know your own worth better than anyone else. Right now, somewhere in the world, a person with a good heart is telling someone with a great idea that it can't be done, that it's worthless. They're not doing it to be cruel. They're doing it to protect them. They're doing it because they are certain. That is the most dangerous limitation, the one delivered with kindness. Certainty is a cage with a comfortable lock. It's more damaging than malice, because you can't fight it with anger. You can only fight it with your life's work. You can only fight it by being so stubborn, so persistent, so true to your own vision that one day the world has no choice but to get on a plane, fly 6,000 miles, and show up at your door to ask you what you knew all along. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. Because there are 1,000 other stories of quiet rebels just like Kenji Tanaka, and they all deserve to be told. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time you had to trust your own path, even when you were told it was worthless. And share this story. Share it with one person you know who is fighting to prove their own worth, because sometimes a story is the one thing they need to keep going. To remind them that the world's definition of value is not the only one that matters, and that the soil, in its own way, always remembers.